Hey everyone, it's Sunny. So recently I placed ninth at Devastators 2 with fairies, and although it was just tragically outside of top 8, I wanted to quickly talk about my list nevertheless. It was an incredible tournament, especially because it was the superior tournament structure Swiss as opposed to double elimination, and I'm so thankful to Snack, Eris, Fen, and Crow's Nest for hosting such a great tournament. Also to Chapel and the Edison format Discord, which I'll have links in the description below. Before I talk about the deck, here are the matchups I played today. I'll also be doing replay analysis over specifically mistakes I made throughout the tournament in a separate video, probably uploaded tomorrow. But yeah, to start off, I had long since given up on this deck with various meta shifts, and it's because I can't stand playing a deck with just unwinnable matchups. Gravekeeper is an obvious one, but Frogs and also Dragon Turbo are just horrid matchups. It's really frustrating to play against those two decks in particular, and it keeps getting worse when you consider that matchups that were really good for you, like Diva Hero, have fallen off, and decks that you were really strong against, like Blackwings, have adapted builds to become stronger against fairies. But the thing is, your bad matchups just really aren't that popular, and recent tournament results told me that there are really only 3 decks I needed to prep for to perform well in the tournament. And those 3 are Blackwings, Values, and Zombies. And quite frankly speaking, Fairy is very competent against all of these matchups. That's why it's especially confusing for me because Fairies have had absolutely horrible results. In the last 6 months, they have won 17th place. Now, I don't think they're the absolute best deck in the format or anything like Keegan does. That would be a bit difficult to argue. But I do think that the results and their conversion rate don't necessarily reflect the strength of the deck. And ultimately, that's why I decided to buckle down and really try to fix my list before this tournament. I'd gone through several different versions, but none of them felt like they were good enough. I had tried builds with more fairies, such as 3 Kristya, 2 Soul, builds that lean more into stun aspects of the deck, with main deck Cyber Dragon and Kaiku, builds that smokescreen into the Machina package, builds that lean heavily into spot removal with Raiko Kai's Hamster, and builds that main deck Royal Decree. But throughout all these lists, the more I changed the deck, the worse certain cards such as Herald of Orange Light and Ursula Kristya became. And that's when I realized that I really just needed to go back to the fundamentals and adapt it to the current meta. Fen's list from Ribbit 3 6 months ago was a really good shell to work with. It's basically Keegan's list from the time and thus has the 2 Thunder Kings, but the absolute biggest change between that list and what I have now has to be 0 Book of Moon, 0 Smashing. We've seen 0 Book of Moon list before, but that was Pro Storm's list, which included 2 Smashing. The issue I have with Book of Moon is that it has deceptively less versatility than people like to describe. I've always been a proponent of Book of Moon over Deep Prison because Book stops the attack, stops synchro plays, and protects your own high-value monsters from their own defense like Deep Prison or Mirror Force. But the issue is that the only actual good application in that circumstance is a third when you want to protect your own monsters. For example, stopping synchro plays and attacks seems good on paper, but the issue is that you still need to be able to clear the monsters afterwards. Let's take the most popular and strongest deck of the format as an example. A very common situation against Blackwings after Book of Moon is when they set 1 afterwards. Now you're in an extremely dangerous situation. Because you have such little extenders, if you commit your normal summon to clear the monster and play around Prison, you play in the sweepers like Mirror Force or Icarus. But if you try and play around the Icarus in the set as Prison, you -1 yourself on the Book of Moon in a deck that can't really generate card advantage easily since your pluses often come through combat, and you fail to clear their monster, which means that you're behind insane amounts of tempo and life. It's usually game losing if this happens, and that's why I decided to go with removal like Deep Prison. Smashing is also removal, but it's removal on your turn after you've already taken damage, and that wasn't cutting it in an aggressive meta. Cyber Dragon over Soul is another weird choice that I wanted to talk about. Earlier, I had complained that my deck has an issue with having a lack of extenders, and that's not really indicative of strong decks of the format. Disregarding my own personal opinion for what the best decks in the format are, if we use generally broad consensus over the strongest decks, all of them have multiple extenders except for Fairies, which only has Soul. So with that said, why would I want to cut the extender in Fairies if I just spent so much time explaining how all good decks have strong extenders? Well, to start off, Soul is comparatively much worse than other extenders. Fairies banish 2 to summon Gem Warped Werewolf, while these other decks tend to banish 2 in order to summon Elemental Hero Absolute Zero. Soul also has a weakness in that it is completely inactive in the early game unless you have Herald, and that means that games where you open multiple Soul just cause you to lose. I tried 1 Soul, but it was honestly just a mediocre card, so I decided to just scrap it altogether. Cyber Dragon is not the same card. It's worse in some ways, such that it doesn't answer certain specific boards, such as Armed Wing against Vayu, where Soul would answer it. And it's also not a fairy monster, which means it doesn't synergize with Herald or Kristya, and it can't be summoned when you already have an established board. but it does trade with defense such as Deep Prison and spot removal like Raikou without committing your normal summon in the early game when you can get out-tempoed and start getting snowballed on. And it also has the added benefit of clearing Catastor and Sirocco. This kind of leads into the next change I have for my deck, which is 2nd Nova Summoner and 3rd Kristya. A lot of people have been saying that 1 Nova Summoner is 100% correct and 2 Kristya is enough because you don't want to brick on 3. But the issue I have with these claims is that they're typically made with the assumption that DD Warrior Lady and Dimensional Alchemist Loop is good enough to win a game. In the previous meta, the best decks were thought to be Diva Hero and like pure Blackwings or Vayu. And in these meta, I think that it is true that it's good enough, but now we have Diva Hero Zombies, Hybrid Blackwings, and Hero Frogs, and trading 1-for-1 with these decks that have extremely high impact extenders using DD Warrior Lady just costs you way too much life to be efficient. The 2nd Nova Summoner is because sometimes you draw 2 Recruiters, and thus you can't crash and end on DD Warrior Lady to remove their monster before Kristya, and you also want to see a Recruiter in your hand because Blackwings and other popular decks like Diva Hero Beat typically use combat to clear monsters, so Recruiters in general are just really strong in the meta. 3 Kristya is just because you want to see it because it's still game winning. The final benefit from adding these two are that it ups the fairy count for Herald. In fear of deck devastation and in the advent of Thunder King Ryo, fairy players have been cutting the fairy count in general. The original Keegan list from the start of Edison's revival had 17 fairies, and ProStorm and Fen's list only had 16 fairies. And I'm not playing Soul, which means that if I didn't add these two, I would only have 14 fairies, and that's definitely not enough, or at the very least makes both Kristya and Orange Light much worse. Lastly, there's no Oppression main because we're in Blackwing meta. It crushes zombies and decks like Quick Draw, but Quick Draw is very unpopular right now, and zombies you should be favored game 1 anyways. For the side deck, I play 3 Crows because it's good against the top 3 decks, and it's also the best side deck card. I wouldn't play any less than 3 in any deck except for Trap Dragons or a Solidarity build. 2 Prussians are obvious, and 3 Dust because you need to maximize odds to kill Light Mirror. I think these 8 cards are completely mandatory in the side deck for every fairy deck if you don't already have them. The last 7 spots are technically flex, but I would say that they should cover probably similar options to the 7 cards I'm about to talk about. The first one are 2 Trapstun. This is because 1, Blackwings are the best deck in the format, and 2, Deck Devastation is game over a lot of the time. You're much more likely to draw live Trapstun than they are to have live Deck Devastation virus, but you still want to optimize your odds of drawing the Deck Devastation out. Some people play 7 Tools instead, but Trapstun doesn't cost life points even though it's not a counter trap like 7 Tools is. I play 3 Rugs because I don't want to forfeit to every Frog player. I will say that I think even with 3 Rugs, 3 Crows you don't win, but at least it lets you try. And then finally I have 2 Shadow Imprisoning Mirrors. These were supposed to be good, but I just didn't test them extensively before the tournament. I kept playing Letio, who was on Hero Beat, instead of Bird players. Honestly, these 2 Shadow Mirrors were pretty trash in all honesty. I drew them once in my second match against Vayu, but it just got stormed. My logic was just that they should be good against Vayu and Zombies, which are 2 out of 3 of the best decks at the moment. And I think I cut 1 Kaiku and 1 Lightning Vortex for the 2, but I don't really remember. It might have been compulsory, but I think it's Lightning Vortex, which I had for Frogs. Now, some of you may be asking, where are these common fairy sides? Kaiku, Soul Release, and Mask of Restrict are really good against Frogs, but the thing I had to come to terms with is just that you need to learn when to give up on a bad matchup instead of compromising your deck in other areas to try and make that bad matchup even. Like, when you pick GBs for a tournament, you shouldn't just try to side 11 cards to make the Hero Beat matchup slight losing. You should just focus on more important matchups and then try and dodge Hero Beat. Nobleman of Crossout is not good against meta decks, and I think I will pretty much always have this opinion. Yes, it is true that the fairy deck really struggles with flip monsters like Raikou, Hamster, and Gravekeeper Spy, but it's incredibly bad for fairies to have an inactive card. There's so many games where I sided Knock against Vayu to try and hit their Raikous, but then they just wouldn't draw the Raikous, and I'm just down a card the entire game. All meta decks that play good flip monsters have alternate lines of play that they can do. It's really only good against weaker decks that have lower power ceilings, so for example, Gravekeepers or a Flambeau deck with a Spy package or Rescue Cat or something like that. Banisher is really only good for the mirror and zombies, but I have enough for zombies and no one plays fairies aside from a very small handful of players, so there's really no point to ever side for the mirror. Everything else it would be good against just clears it easily. For example, it would be technically strong against Quick Draw, but they can just normal summon Volcanic Rocket and just clear it easily. They can set a Raikou and clear it. It's really not difficult for them to out this card. Breaker is another card that I think some people speak highly of, but I just don't think this card is good in Edison. 1600 is just way too small. I understand that it's supposed to clear the Light Mirror, but you have to spend your normal summon just to clear it. So, in this hypothetical, you get Light Mirrored, presumably, lose an entire card of value while they have an established board, then you spend a full turn to clear the Light Mirror, and then you give them another turn to pressure you, and then you can start playing 2 turns after you got Light Mirrored. It's just not worth it. The final card is Compulsory Evacuation Device, and I think this card is actually good, but I just didn't have the space. I might put it in over the 3rd rug and swap the 2 rugs for 2 Frog Hate cards. I'm not sure what they would be. Maybe like Chain Disappearance, but I'm not totally sure. The extra deck is pretty standard. My flex spot between Avenging Knight, Android, and Light End was spent on Avenging Knight because in a vacuum it's the best monster, but it's pretty hard to make without Soul since you need Raikou and a 4 and Orange, which is 3 normal summons or 2 normal summons and a call, or a return from a different dimension. I don't play 3s, so I don't have Android, but it's probably better than just having Avenging Knight there for that specific niche situation. But I think of the 3, actually Light End might be the best because realistically, this type of specific level 8 would only come up if I'm playing against Lightsworns. So the Light End can actually clear Judgment Dragon, whereas the Avenging Knight can't. So that's why I'm thinking Light End might be better, even though it's like the worst monster of the 3. Sorry, that was a lot of talking for a list that's honestly pretty basic, but I just wanted to share my thoughts since this deck has had a drought in results, and I absolutely love it and would love for more people to pick it up. If you have comments or questions, please let me know. I'd love to answer them. Finally, shoutouts to WT Breezy for also going 5-2 in Swiss with the Fairy deck. It's unlucky that they couldn't top due to tiebreakers, but I'm glad to see the deck representing. Also, shoutouts to Finn for always listening to my rants about the various fairy builds. But yeah, replay analysis up tomorrow, and as always, thanks for watching.